I've had an absolute blast playing a Warlock in Baldur's Gate 3. In this video, I'm sharing my full Warlock build with the Great Old One as subclass. Just like mentioned in my Barbarian build, I don't want to put too much emphasis on either race or background because both of these things cannot be changed during respecking a character. Instead, I prefer to offer builds that also can be applied to companions, so simply pick whatever race and background you like. It usually only has a marginal impact overall anyway. The first thing I get as a Warlock is 2 cantrips and a spell slot. Let's look into the cantrips first. Blade Ward can be interesting for some survivability, but I would mostly pick it in a melee focused Warlock build, which this one is not going to be. Bone Chill is devastating against some targets, completely keeping them from healing back up. The 1 turn duration can make it hard though to time properly, and it is useless if the enemies don't heal themselves at all. Eldritch Blast is the cornerstone of this build, and as such a guaranteed pick. Multiple beams per cast make for powerful ways of leveraging this cantrip. Friends is good to further boost some dialogue options, which the Warlock as a charisma focused class is already perfect for. Mage Hands offers some utility when exploring and can theoretically also throw and shove some things. I personally haven't grown fond of it yet though. Minor Illusion is great in a more sneaky focused build where you want additional ways of controlling the detection area of enemies. For today's build it is less relevant though. Poison Spray is a solid choice against enemies getting too close, but it's not a must-have in any way. True Strike is good for setting up larger spells later on, but since I will be choosing mostly area-focused spells next to Eldritch Blast, it is less interesting. Each beam from Eldritch Blast has its own attack roll, which means that True Strike would only benefit part of a single cast rather than the full spell. Personally, I go with Poison Spray here as the second option. But aside from picking Eldritch Blast, it is fine to pick either of the remaining cantrips. Subclass is up next, and the decision comes with major differences in playstyle, including changes to some of the available spells to choose from. The Fiend subclass grants temporary hit points when killing enemies. This is good for survivability, but does also interfere with other means of gaining temporary hit points. The Great Old One boosts critical hits by adding the possibility of area frightening against enemies. And the Archfey allows to attempt Charm or Frighten in a more controlled manner, but it also comes at the cost of having to spend an action to cast it. For my build here, the Great Old One is the clear winner. Focusing on Eldritch Blast as a cornerstone of the build means each cast shoots multiple beams and as such has multiple chances to crit and trigger Mortal Reminder. When it comes to the choice of spells, it is important to understand what the purpose of the build is. The idea is to boost Eldritch Blast as much as possible, which means my primary action each turn does not cost any spell slots. Spell slots are thus meant to either boost Eldritch Blast even further, or to provide opportunities of optimizing survivability or the use of reactions. A guaranteed pick for me here initially is Hex. Hex adds additional damage to each attack, and as such synergizes perfectly with Eldritch Blast. As long as all beams are fired against the Hex target, multiple beams benefit from the added damage. Due to the limited amount of spell slots for Warlocks, my second spell should add something more situational. Here I personally pick Hellish Rebuke. The reason is twofold. One, as a reaction it can allow me to deal significant damage outside my own turn, and on top of that I am able to decide in each instance if activating it is worth the spell slot or not. Other options, as per personal preference, are fine next to Hex as well though. I would just advise staying away from Witch Bolt here. Witch Bolt excels by allowing it to be used every turn without costing another spell slot. Contrary to recasting Hex though, it requires an action to do so, which interferes with casting Eldritch Blast. When it comes to the abilities, pushing Charisma to 16 is a no-brainer, considering it is my primary ability as a Warlock. The reason I don't go to 17 is because uneven numbers do not increase the bonus modifier, so it would be a waste of points right now. Next up is Dexterity to 16 as well. This is relevant for a +3 bonus to armor class in order to get more survivability, and for an increase to initiative in order to go early during a fight. I then set Constitution to 14 to push my health points as high as possible, and to get a +2 modifier on Constitution saving throws. This is relevant as well when taking damage in order to not lose concentration that some spells require, such as Hex for example. For the rest, it is a matter of personal preference. I personally accept a lower intelligence because I get too frustrated by the incredibly short jumping distance of strength 8 characters. There obviously are ways around that, but it always is such a nuisance during exploration, so that's why I push strength higher here. Skill proficiencies can be chosen somewhat freely. Personally, I go for acrobatics to increase my resistance against being shoved, and then I pick deception and intimidation for additional options during dialogue. At level 2, I get some additional health, with this true for all levels. Aside from that, I also get a second spell slot and can pick one more spell and 2 Eldritch invocations. Most of the time at this stage, I want to use my spell slots for Hex and the reactive use of Hellish Rebuke, so the choice of spell matters only marginally. Personally, I choose Arms of Hater here. It deals damage to enemies close to me and might even be enough to kill one of them. If not, it also has a chance to successfully prevent reactions, which means I could then run away without risking an opportunity attack. This would get rid of the threatened status effect for me and make my ranged spells better again. In terms of invocations, the decision is much more important, and both are more or less a given already. Agonizing Blast is the first one. It boosts the damage of every single beam of Eldritch Blast by +3 already due to the Charisma modifier. And this gets only more powerful as Charisma is increased further and additional beams get added to each blast. Armor of Shadows could be useful if Race Choice doesn't grant proficiency in certain armor types, but I wouldn't pick it personally due to more favorable choices available. Beast Speech is a no-go for me. Being able to speak to animals is absolutely great in general throughout the entire game, but there are other options to unlock this. Potions, scrolls, or a barbarian companion with a Wildheart subclass are amongst them. Beguiling Influence is a good choice when focusing on dialogue over combat, but this is not the case for that particular build here. Devil's Sight is a solid choice without a doubt if the race choice doesn't grant some dark vision already. It can theoretically also get picked over Repelling Blast as a second invocation here. I personally prefer the push effect though and tend to tackle darkness in other ways or later. Fiendish Vigor, while boosting survivability, is simply not strong enough in my personal opinion. Mask of Many Faces would be another good choice for something more dialogue focused, but in this case it's not relevant for me. One with Shadows would be great as a bonus action, but as an action it interferes with Eldritch Blast too much for me. Repelling Blast is my personal second choice here. The push effect can be toggled on and off on demand, and it offers great ways of keeping enemies at a distance to avoid getting the threatened status effect. Also, the world is filled with areas where it is possible to push enemies down for additional damage or even into chasms for instant death. Thief of Five Fates is a no-go for me here as well, since you cannot have more than one concentration spell active, and I do plan to utilize either Hex or Cloud of Daggers more intensely, and the latter one gets also unlocked on the next level already. At level 3 I get an upgrade to level 2 spell slots, which opens up a bit more flexibility during combat. On top of that, it's also time to choose a boon. In terms of spells first, Cloud of Daggers is a clear winner for me here. It deals damage when cast and at the beginning of a character's turn. Furthermore, enemies can be shoved or thrown into the area of damage, and with proper positioning it is also possible to have enemies simply run through it themselves due to choke points, for example. The only downside is that it requires concentration too, so I have to choose between Hex or Cloud of Daggers at any time. When it comes to the boon, there are 3 choices. Pact of the Chain allows me to summon a familiar from a variety of options. This opens up ways for additional damage, distraction of enemies, as well as status effects such as blind or frightened. Pact of the Blade is mostly relevant for melee-focused warlocks that also want to deal damage with weapons. That is not the case for me here. And Pact of the Tome adds additional useful cantrips, but all of them cost an action when used, which means something else would have to give, and I don't want to sacrifice the focus on Eldritch Blast and the synergies being built around it. So my choice is clearly Pact of the Chain, because I can flexibly choose what type of familiar aids me best in a given situation. Also, as another body on the battlefield, it can do some damage on its own, and keep some damage and other harmful effects from my warlock. At this level, I also replace Arms of Hater with Misty Step. Misty Step opens up more opportunities to leverage my bonus actions. Also, it is a safer option to get away from enemies close to me. And it even makes it possible to easily reach high grounds that then grant a +2 bonus on every attack roll. At level 4, I start by picking another cantrip. This isn't relevant really at this point, so choose whatever you prefer. Personally, I go for Friends here to get some extra boost during dialogue. Next up is another spell. We're still at spell level 2, so nothing major was added yet. With Eldritch Blast, Hex, and Cloud of Daggers locked in as my main spells for now, this is another opportunity to pick something that suits personal playstyle. I do like Mirror Image here because it adds a layer of protection when needed, and while it does cost an action rather than a bonus action, its bonuses usually last for more than one turn. I also get to choose my first feat. In the end, all feat choices for this build come down to choosing ability improvement twice with +2 charisma each time to max out the primary ability. And then on top of that, I choose Spell Sniper to increase my chances for critical strikes. Due to multiple beams for each Eldritch Blast later on, this feat increases in value since every beam has its own attack roll. On top of that, it also synergizes well with the subclass passive Mortal Reminder from the Great Old One. Spell Sniper only becomes really powerful later though, as Eldritch Blast beams increase in quantity as well. So I choose the Charisma improvement first here, which boosts success chances during dialogue, improves my hit chance, and gives a guaranteed bonus to all beams as well due to the Agonizing Blast invocation chosen earlier. At level 5, my pact is deepened, which for me means that any familiar that I summon gets an extra attack when attacking during their turn. This means a bit more damage outside my turn since the familiar is controlled separately. Spell slots also get upgraded to level 3 at this point, providing a new range of spells here. Counterspell is one that works well in this build because it allows to improve reactions even more. Doing more beneficial things outside my turn while dealing lots of damage when I can use my own actions is a great way to increase overall efficiency. Before getting Counterspell though, I prefer to pick Hunger of Hater here though. As a concentration spell, it does compete with Hex and Cloud of Daggers, since all of them cannot be active at the same time, but where Cloud of Daggers is amazing in tight spaces or when multiple enemies are close together, Hunger of Hater comes with a much larger area of impact. This means it allows me to damage more enemies at once, while also providing other benefits such as blinded or difficult terrain. At last, there's also another invocation to choose. While Mire of Mind and Sign of Ill Omen are added as new options, my pick is Devil's Sight to ensure from here on that darkness isn't something I have to worry about anymore, regardless of whether or not it has natural or magical causes. At level 6, the Great Old One subclass grants me Entropic Ward. This gives me even more options outside my turn by adding another reaction to my repertoire. Not only does this help with survivability, it also offers another way of improving my own attacks. This level is also where I pick Counterspell to boost my reactions to the fullest, now having Hellish Rebuke and Counterspell with a spell slot cost, and Entropic Ward as well as Opportunity Attack without any extra cost. At level 7, a bit of additional utility is added. First, I now have access to a few level 4 spells. Neither of those is really a reason to celebrate, but I do like picking Banishment to ensure some additional crowd control. It can't hurt to be able to take a tough enemy out of the fight for 2 turns. In terms of invocations, I now also have access to Book of Ancient Secrets, Dreadful Word, and Sculptor of Flesh. It doesn't really matter too much what is picked here though, but personally I prefer Book of Ancient Secrets because it adds some additional options that might be valuable in certain situations without costing any spell slots. At level 8, it's another spell that really is up to preference again. Personally, I picked Dimension Door to be able to potentially save an ally by teleporting them away with me. In terms of feat, it is an easy +2 charisma again. The overall bonus still outweighs something like Spell Sniper in my opinion, especially since Eldritch Blast hasn't reached all beams per cast yet. At level 9, new level 5 spells become available. Unfortunately, neither of those really impresses me, especially because they all require concentration as well. That's why I personally choose Blight here as another damage option. Another reason for that choice is the fact that Warlocks always cast spells at the highest level, so Blight is cast as a level 5 spell and does deal more damage than shown here. When it comes to the next invocation, 3 new options are available with Whispers of the Grave, Otherworldly Leap, and Minion of Chaos. While I don't use it that often, I personally pick Minion of Chaos here because the different element options allow me to exploit potential vulnerabilities of some enemies more efficiently. At level 10, it remains rather unexciting in my opinion. First, I get some protection against psychic damage. It isn't mind-blowing, no pun intended, but does still present itself as useful in some fights. I also get to pick another cantrip, but that really doesn't matter much here. Personally, I picked Bone Chill to add some necrotic damage that doesn't cost a spell slot to my repertoire. In terms of spells, we also didn't get anything new, so the options are somewhat lackluster for the build. I prefer going for something that is similar to Dimension Door, so basically something that is more situational, but might make a real difference when used. That's why I choose Darkness here, as it can buy some valuable turns when dropping it on a few enemies I don't want to be at 100% capacity during combat initially. Overall though, the important part to reach Warlock level 10 for is a third beam on Eldritch Blast. At level 5, a second one was added already, and now at level 10, each Eldritch Blast shoots 3 beams that can even be shot at different targets. At level 11, I can choose a single level 6 spell. This one does not cost any spell slots, but is limited to 1 activation per long rest. Personally, I go for Eye Bite here. While it is a concentration spell as well, sometimes pure damage is not the way to go, and being able to put enemies to sleep, for example, can be quite powerful. As another spell up to level 5, I definitely want to stay away from anything else requiring concentration, so I picked Dissonant Whispers. While being a level 1 spell, its damage does scale when being upcast at level 5. Also, it adds some psychic damage to my arsenal and gives me the opportunity to frighten enemies. At level 12, I add Shatter, which also scales upwards in damage and gives me some thunder damage in case I come across any thunder vulnerabilities. Just like last level though, it really comes down to personal preference here. As my last invocation, I pick Otherworldly Leap, which adds to my movability without requiring a spell slot like Misty Step, for example. Life Drinker as a new invocation to choose is great in general, but to really shine it requires a more melee focused build, ideally with Pact of Blade. Closing out this build then is the last feat. With Charisma at 20 already, I personally pick Spell Sniper here. This doubles my crit chances on every attack, and with 3 beams per Eldritch Blast by now, this really adds up over time. In terms of cantrip, I prefer Ray of Frost over Fireball because it also reduces the target's movement speed, which does help to keep them at a distance. But Fireball would be more than fine here as well. I just stay away from the other two. Shocking Grasp requires melee range, and Thorn Whip pulls enemies closer, which is the opposite of what I want. The build obviously plays differently in group, but here's a quick example to showcase its versatility and effectiveness. This is a solo fight against 5 wolves at level 11-12 with a dozen critters aiding them. I activated Otherworldly Leap before the fight to reach my desired safety spot in turn 1 without having to spend a spell slot for Misty Step or an action for dash. I then carefully positioned Cloud of Daggers in order to have as many enemies as possible run through it when approaching me. My Familiar is placed in a way to intercept some of the attackers, which means less damage to my Warlock. Multiple enemies immediately die or get damaged as they try to get close to me. I then summon a Fire Elemental as an additional body that keeps enemies at bay, while also dealing significant damage. After multiple critters dying in the Cloud of Daggers, I use Eldritch Blast to clear the space in front of me by pushing enemies away. As soon as it's my Fire Elemental's turn again, I deal area damage first, and then teleport in front of my Warlock, now ensuring that anyone attacking my Warlock in melee has to run through the Cloud of Daggers. From here, it's simply focus killing anyone close to my Warlock with Eldritch Blast, while the Fire Elemental keeps tanking and doing area damage without also hurting my Warlock. In the end, even the Fire Elemental survives, and my Warlock took barely any damage at all. Not only that, I also had 1 spell slot left that could have been used in case of an emergency. And that's it for today. This is a great and mostly straightforward build for anyone that wants to stay at range and blast enemies to death. The reactions really add up over time, and the flexibility around multi-targeting with a single cast also allows to keep even multiple enemies at bay. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite playstyle is, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this in the future. See you in Baldur's Gate 3.